How good is a level 9 player? And what does a level 3 player look like? And are they at all close in skill level? Well, over these past few days, I've sat down and watched demos from every level on Faceit to answer one question. How big is the skill gap between each rank? Today, we'll be taking a close look at what every level on Faceit looks like. So if you're a level 3 player wanting to get to level 10, I'll show you exactly what your gameplay should look like. And keep in mind, this is coming from someone with over 2,500 matches on Faceit, all played after the release of CS2, climbing all the way from level 3 to being in the top 1,000 players in my region. But before we get started with the video, I want to quickly share with you a knife giveaway that I'll be hosting. To be entered to win, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join the RyderDie Discord. Link to that is in the description. Let's get started. Now, in order to set our baseline, we must first take a look at level 1. And to no one's surprise, this elo bracket is filled with players that demonstrate very little proficiency with basic CS mechanics, and is also a place where players leave spawn on pistol round without armor or utility, or if you're this guy, just with an R8 and a flashbang. I've noticed this in previous videos where I reviewed low elo demos, and that is, players in this elo range are chronically disconnecting. And not for 5 minutes, but rather after round 3 and for the entire match. If you're someone that's stuck in this rank, it's likely that you're very new to Counter-Strike, and for that, I cannot blame you. My biggest piece of advice is simply play the game more and to maybe check out some YouTube videos where you can learn some basic CS fundamentals so you can start building good habits. Moving on to level 3, the biggest change we see is in players' mechanics. Players are starting to aim more at head levels sometimes and showing some level of understanding of player positioning. At this rank, we start to see common lineups being thrown. Of course, some of them are still missing, but regardless, an effort is being made to throw useful and effective utility. However, the glaring issue with this rank is an overall lack of awareness and respect of when and where an enemy can be somewhere. A prime example of this is the cap player who initially wants to support B, then decides to take a look mid, and without acknowledging the fact that their teammates have entirely forfeited mid, wide swings, and dives to a player hiding bench. And to some surprise, there are still players often AFKing an entire match shortly after it begins. I actually found it kind of strange how many match rooms I stumbled upon that had one or more players with the lever penalty applied. Overall, this is the rank where to some degree CS is starting to be played more seriously and players are obviously more invested in winning, other than the AFKs of course. Before we talk about level 5, let's take a moment to talk about the sponsor of today's video. SkinsMonkey is an automated CS2 trading site. SkinsMonkey provides an instant way to get new skins. If you encounter any issues, there's a 24/7 live chat support. To find the perfect skin, there's a filter tool and a search bar to find exactly what you're looking for. If you use my promo code RyderDie, you can start trading on SkinsMonkey and earn up to $5 for free. Trade $100 worth of skins to make the most of it. But if you'd rather buy your skins, you can use my promo code RyderDie to earn a 35% deposit bonus. Thank you SkinsMonkey for sponsoring this video. The next rank we're going to be looking at is level 5. And there are two obvious changes outside of improved mechanics that I had noticed. One being, there's much more team play happening throughout the match. An example of this is a player dropping a rifle to his teammate without a weapon. After that, they trade out their teammate's mid, go ahead and hit a 20 bullet COD reload, holy cow, and then attempt to trade another teammate who just died from heaven. These types of things can sometimes be done with minimal communication, but to be totally honest, after a decent amount of playtime, these sorts of things should just come naturally. Things like dropping teammates' weapons mid-round, trading teammates out when they push for space, or just overall awareness of where your teammates are dying from are things that just come after several hours of playtime. The second thing I noticed was how post plants are being played. In pretty much every demo I saw before this rank, players would behave in such a way that appeared that the game state hadn't changed once the bomb gets planted, when in fact it does. I'm not going to say these post plants are being played perfectly, however, comparatively to lower ranks, players are more concerned with the bomb rather than just continuing to W key for unnecessary space. With that being said though, there are still some awkward things happening throughout the match, such as missed utility, overall battle awareness similar to level 3 players, and buying a P250 on CT pistol, which is a complete waste of money. And for those that don't understand, let me explain. A P250, while costing $300, now doesn't allow you to purchase armor and is less accurate of a pistol, while only providing similar benefits of keeping your USP. That being, it'll one-tap anyone that's shot in the head. Of course, the gun offers higher armor penetration, but if you plan on shooting people in the body, just buy dualies and play closer angles. In my opinion, there's no situation where purchasing a P250 is actually beneficial on a pistol round if you're a CT. Moving on to level 7, there are a few things that are very different from the lower levels. Starting now, it's not entirely uncommon to see people saving their guns. Along with this, for the first time, players are throwing flashes for one another and then actually using them. And compared to levels 3 and 5, overall awareness is much better and there is a significant increase in overall mechanics. However, one thing I did notice in this elo bracket, which is also very common in levels 5 and below, is just simply poor decision making. A lot of rounds are thrown simply because players are making very questionable decisions on the map. One of the examples that I found during this particular demo was this mid rotate player. Early in the round, the cap player dies to an AWP top mid, mid, and instead of respecting that the op could be posted watching him indoors, and instead of respecting the AWP that could be posted watching him indoors, he just swings top mid and dies to the opper he knew was already there. Or here, this player decides to walk out B in a 4v3, which, don't get me wrong, isn't bad in of itself. However, deciding to make footsteps here and then proceeding to not clear all the angles that the enemy could potentially be in, that is. Alternatively, what they could have done is simply commit to walk clearing the site or just group mid with their team in a man advantage situation. Remember, they're in a 4v3. And then finally, this example. This player decides to walk through a smoke long doors during an anti-eco. This was during a 4v2, so this risky kind of play can be justified to some capacity, but there are probably at least 5 to 10 other plays that you can commit to, one being just taking fights mid with your opper. A general rule of thumb is if the play feels wrong, it's probably wrong. All right, let's talk about level 9. Without a doubt, the biggest improvement I saw specifically was crosshair placement and gun control. And I would just like to highlight this trend. One thing that is a common theme as we go through these ranks is the higher elo we get, the better players are at the fundamentals of CS2. However, I will say the jump from level 7 to 9 in regards to crosshair placement and counter strafing actually caught me off guard with the improvement. But what I also noticed was players were throwing much more utility, likely because at this rank, people start to really appreciate how utility can make a massive difference in how rounds play out. However, something that I also saw was because players were keen on throwing lots of utility, there were also a lot of misses or just overall questionable usage of utility. For example, this window player HEing themselves for 21 damage, which by the way happened like 6 different times during this CT side. Or when this opera started to get run down A, they decided to smoke jungle for the enemy team instead of repositioning sooner to be in a more advantageous angle. And that brings me to my last observation about level 9. While for the most part, level 9 players in comparison to other elo brackets have much better crosshair placement, utility usage, general awareness amongst other things, they seem to often fall short in the department of positioning. If we take another look at this opera playing jungle, instead of repositioning to a safer angle, they decide to swing further into this exposed angle, which leaves them vulnerable if an enemy were to walk out palace through smoke. And of course, that's exactly what ends up happening. And of course, unfortunately, at this time too, that's also when ramp players start to scale out of Tetris. Now, I don't really blame this player for making this kind of aggressive play, especially when they have a teammate posted stairs watching palace. But if we go back even further to 1 minute and 37 seconds, we see that's when we see our teammate die. At this point, you're confronted with 2 different options. Commit to fighting for sight or rotate to a different position that'll enable you to have a higher impact on the round. And if we take an even closer look, we see that our teammate here also has an AWP, which makes the fight that we're likely going to get into, close stairs, from someone jumping over sandwich or just scaling from ramp, more difficult and risky, especially considering the palace player can come out any second like we had already mentioned. What could have been done in this situation is simply rotate through CT, which on Mirage is actually very valuable space to be taking during a retake. And an added benefit to that as well is that if you're holding an op, taking CT is probably the best position you can be in here other than deep jungle. There, you can go back to mid window, wait for T's to start scaling site, which will likely result in a free kill if the enemy doesn't do their chores and smoke off jungle. Oh wait, we did that for them. Moving on to level 10. But before we get started with this rank, I want to quickly explain what elo bracket we're actually looking at. Instead of pulling a demo from low level 10, which is about 2000 elo, I decided to look for something a bit higher. So the demo that we're looking at is actually from 2400 elo. The reason for this is the same reason why we jumped from level 3 to 5, 5 to 7, and so on. If we take a look at low level 10, it would be almost indistinguishable from level 9. The only difference between those players sometimes is just a few wins. So instead, we're looking at players that have established themselves in this rank and will likely not drop below 2000 elo again. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the round that put this game into overtime. First things first, like every other time we moved up in the ranks, we see players have better fundamentals such as crosshair placement and counter strafing. But what we also see, and I'll highlight this more later, is players shooting through smokes successfully way more often, which simply shows their game sense and awareness of enemy position. Something else I want to take a look at is just how quickly the round shifts after the site is taken. Almost immediately once available, the bomb planter puts down the C4, and if we take a look at the other players, they're instantaneously going into post-plant positioning. The only time players start moving more aggressively is once the last remaining CT's position is discovered and there's only 20 seconds left on the bomb. And speaking of playing post-plant, something that I also noticed, which was different from all other elos, is where these players are planting the C4. Consistently, when presented the opportunity, these players are planting the bomb in locations that will enable them to play more effectively in the post plant. The first example is during this 2v2 where this player decides to plant opposite default and then go ramp, which in my opinion is a very undervalued plant location, and also somewhere if you pay attention, you'll often see pro players plant at. Unfortunately, this player lost the round, but in all honesty, it was played very well. Another example is when this player plants front sight. Once the smoke wall is up, planting here gives the same benefit of planting opposite default, and after planting, he makes an educated guess on where the enemy is and gets a spam through on jungle, which is something I mentioned earlier. Out of all the elos we've already seen, I saw this the absolute most starting in this elo. The reason behind this is just due to the amount of reps that these players have playing the game. They understand most of the time what is going through the enemy's head and where they likely are given the information they have. Now, the only negative I can find during this demo is perhaps how these players are swinging. There were a couple instances where I saw players crab walking or slow walking in angles, but this was few and far between. I will say though, at least from my experience playing in this elo, the biggest downfall that I see in a lot of players is how easily some of them will tilt. I can't even begin to explain how many games I've played that could have easily been won if someone or several people hadn't given up after a few unlucky rounds. And from my experience, the higher elo you get, the worse players tilt. Oh, and I almost forgot. Why are people still buying head armor when they know without a doubt the enemy team will have AKs? This is the first round of overtime. You know they're gonna have AKs. Okay, moving on. Now we can finally take a look at what top 1000 pugs on Faceit look like. Keep in mind that all these demos were pulled from Europe, so the average elo of this lobby is approximately 3,500. It goes without saying that crosshair placement and other CS fundamentals are almost flawless at this rank, but something that caught me a little off guard was just how good everyone's movement is. Like in this clip. Something as simple as crouch jumping on Xbox and then quickly jump uncrouching to peek short just isn't something you normally see in lower elos. Not only that, but the overall ability to aim in this elo is without a doubt much better than any elo I watched before this. And during the same clip, we can highlight just how good the crosshair placement is when this person scales A. Their crosshair just kind of never leaves exactly where it should be. Players in this rank are also very aware of how nades fly once they leave their hand. A good example of this is this player who blows open the smoke mid. In circumstances where a lineup isn't feasible, these players appear to be very confident to throw utility exactly how they intend to. And finally, let's talk about game sense. Before, we saw that level 10 players in 2400 elo are aware of players that are behind smokes, and of course, so are these players, but something that is even more impressive is this play long. Once they have long control, they are aware that when the smoke is up, the only way they can lose long is if the enemy team decides to pop through the smoke. So this player plays anti for a moment, the pop happens, and then our player demonstrates a moment of trigger discipline before getting 4 and then just winning the round for their team. Overall, this elo is exactly what you expect from top 1000. Great fundamentals, game sense, and pretty much every other aspect of what goes into great Counter-Strike. Oh, and one more thing. These players also rage. All right, for the last rank that we'll be looking at, we're going to be looking at pros. Tier 1 and Tier 2 salaried professionals are without a doubt playing CS on an entirely different level. Every mechanic that we've discussed so far in this video is on display at the most elite level. However, what is more difficult to see when watching them is their sheer level of game sense. For some players, it appears that when they peek angles, they just so happen to find players or get lucky and find timings. But what's really happening underneath the surface, more times than not, is these players playing 3 to 4 steps ahead of anyone that they find in their matches, which is usually other top 1000 players. And if it isn't their superior game sense, pros like Donk simply just run over these players like how he does in tier 1 events. By the way, in the demo we're watching, Donk's name is OQEMUXAT because he's in streamer mode, so just keep in mind that's Donk. Something else that I want to mention that I noticed and have mentioned in previous videos is how often Donk chooses to op in his matches. It may be surprising to some of you how great he is with this gun, but to be fair, if you've watched any amount of Donk pugs, you know he's picking up the op at least a few times in all of his matches. Now, a while back, I had a chance to play with Donk on NA servers while he was visiting for IEM Dallas in 2024. It was a great experience, and it was nice to have the opportunity to play with someone like him. I was even lucky enough to get matched with him twice. Once on Mirage, which was a good time and an easy win, and then another time on Vertigo, which was not so nice. Not because he was a bad teammate, but because this was also a game because Donk was such high elo. We got paired with 3 other low level 10s at the time, and we're playing against a few 3K plus elo players and some other level 10s. And for me at the time, it was an absolute nightmare. I didn't feel comfortable competing against these types of players, and for Donk, it was just another Saturday where he had the chance to fry North American players. The game ended 13-10 after he just willed us to a win, dropping 36 kills in regulation. After the game, I had this unsettling realization that the skill gap between low level 10 and someone that plays professionally like Donk is so unbelievably massive. It even dwarfs the skill gap between level 3 and level 10 by a lot. Alright, that's going to be it for the video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like. If you want to stay up to date with my content, be sure to subscribe and then hit the bell to be notified. Oh, and one more thing, you should check out Maestro AI. They provide insight on skins trading, so if you want to get a leg up in your next trade, you should go to their website. Link to that is in the description. Alright, thanks for watching.